19. Superstrings. Vale ran until his body ached. Mud splashed up his stolen moleskin trousers. He was driven by terror. He had to be the first to reach the tower. The processes could draw on a bottomless pit of rage, a black lake of hatred and undernourished greed that drove them. Only Vale understood that. Only he had the wit to feed them just enough morsels and hold a final cataclysm at bay. He had saved the Phasals' lives more times than they'd ever know, and for all that, he'd received only curses and ingratitude. But he could only imagine the revenge the processes would wreak on the mutinous guards. The monsters followed their own instincts, fighting between themselves as readily as they might turn on their slaves. The death of Ryogus Talim only emphasised the dilemma. Since the beginning, in the first phase of the city, he, Vale Vorianstri Chevrel, had walked free. He need only jump a silver stream to see 5 young Phasals grown old in the enslavement of the processes. But a doom hung over him too. In the tower, he had seen his own future, a comatose weakling wound in a cocoon as a surety of his cooperation. Counting Captain Peccary, there had been 5 Phasal slaves. He had walked free. Yet there were 7 insect head guards, counting their captain, snatched from the 3rd and oldest phase of the city. So there was no hope at all, not for any of them. At any moment he expected to scream of rage as the processes discovered the latest reverse to their plans. He rounded a corner and came in sight of the looming tower. Bells clanked, chains ground, anvils rang, and in Vale's head came a shriek. Not the cry of an angry beast, but the lost wail of a woman from another world whose eyes burned in his head. He fought it off, struggling to subdue the latest onslaught in its endless attempts to pierce his mind. His thoughts were tinged with blood, they tasted in his mouth. He gasped and fell senseless into a doorway. "You fool! You reject your own world!" "I thought Time Lords could regenerate when they died," said Ace. "Really?" said the Doctor, or Wilby as he kept reminding her. "Fascinating." She shook out her damp hair again and refused to despair. She had tried to explain things to him, but it grew more difficult. She was realising too fast and too late that she knew precious little about him herself. His home and origins, even his name if he really had one, were a complete mystery. How old was he? And what decimal point of his life had she knocked around with him for? Anything she thought she knew, she might have just dreamt. But there must be things written down somewhere. Letters addressed to him, or Christmas cards. She gave up on the idea that he ever filled in forms or kept a diary. Anything like that was probably lost or scattered across the city when the TARDIS exploded. As it was, the Doctor, Wilby the Doctor, whatever he wanted to call himself, seemed to forget everything she told him within 5 minutes of hearing it. They sat away from the Phasals, reluctant to join the elaborate ritual that formed a eulogy for Ryogus. His pockets were sifted, each remembered item honoured. The Doctor looked awkward. He busied himself making a plumb line from a piece of string weighted with one of Shonzi's finger biscuits. "You're from Gallifrey too," Ace went on impatiently. "Gallifrey's a planet, Professor. I told you. It's your home. Have you forgotten that as well?" The Doctor sighed and intoned, "And when I got there, the cupboard was bare." "Then why did you challenge the process?" "Ah." "Well?" "I was pushed," he said pointedly. "And it seemed like a good idea at the time. Tell me about your home," he added, and seemed alarmed by her scowl. She couldn't just sit there. "If you're going to meet the process, shouldn't we be preparing a trap or something?" He tutted, held up the plumb line, and squinted at the tall grey buildings that surrounded them. "Look at this," he complained, passing her the string. "Worse than that ridiculous tower in Pisa." Sometimes he really riled her. "You remember some things, then?" She held up the plumb line and was too startled to notice any reply. Seen against the straight line of the string, the threat of the illusion she had grown used to was renewed. As the city rose in an upward curve around them, the buildings tilted inwards more and more alarmingly. "String is a very important thing," said the Doctor. "Something to remember." Claustrophobia clamped in again. She wanted to hide. No, not hide. She wanted to smash her way out. The city was fixed on the inside of a sphere. "Professor," she said quietly, "where are we?" The doctor smiled hopelessly at her and shook his head. "If only I could remember, Ace," said Ace. "Yes, Ace. Right," she said. "You'd better leave the trap to me." The moans of the funeral stopped. A distant howl echoed from the direction of the watchtower. The phasal shifted uneasily, recognising a summons. In Ace's mind, it was a cry of unthinking animal rage. To the doctor, the man who would be the doctor, it was the inevitable acceptance of his challenge. He pressed his fingers to his forehead and tried to remember what he had said. What was he doing here? Where and who was he? "I don't think I've lost my memory," he whispered. "I think it's been stolen." "What I really need," said Ace, "is a couple of crates of Nitro 9. Then we could really talk business." Shonzi had been sitting close by, unable to face participating in the Phasal's ritualised wallowing in misery. "Time Lords are like that," he said, "aren't they?" The night crackled with frost. Above the twinkling inert lights of the city's Olmesian quarter, Pazithi Gallifreya was a burnished sickle in the sky. To the west, snow clouds loomed on the horizon. Those who plot the destruction of others often fall victim themselves. Pelatov's collected sageries, an illuminated portfolio of the classical repository, surface-bound in Levia hide with a scroll screen of tempered quartz, limited edition. Rassilon slid the volume to the back of his desk with mild irritation. The foreword he had been inveigled into input for the screen tome eluded him. He found the philosopher brethren of the 3rd century pompous in the extreme. It annoyed him to have to write some portentous frippery praising a long-dead scholar who undoubtedly bored his students 5,000 years ago as much as he bored his readers today. The ancients have much to teach, but one should not dwell amongst them forever. Could anything from so long ago be held relevant to today's world? Pelatov had unwittingly damned himself. There was only now. Rassilon must never slide into that trap. It was abhorrent that any civilization could be founded on superstition and barbarism. These only weighed down any advance. But the mythic schools, resembling and run like factories, dealt in holy lies and taught the children religious ignorance. They reinforced what was already in the dark Gallifreyan soul. The people must believe in something, and so belief was supplied and readily packaged, and blood flowed readily in the holy games. Yet it was an honour to be asked for such an inscription, but he might change his mind again tomorrow. Pazithi the mystic, the virgin moon goddess, still watched over them and was still worshipped. Yet even with the antique telescope at his window, he could make out the industrial complexes that fouled her sacred surfaces with angled shadow, the dust grabbers and smelting factories that raped her divine celestial beauty. He tabbed through the pages of his journal. It had been a year to the day since his visit to the inner temple. No one had seen the Pythia in that time. No public appearances or private audiences. Occasional bulletins stated that she was in good vitality, but as her 170th sun cycle approached, she deemed it prudent to work on public affairs in privacy. Other duties were delegated to the closed ranks of her staff and the Court of Principals. Rassilon's own information network was confounded by the barriers of officialdom that surrounded the Pythia. Her staff were unbribable and beyond infiltration. After a lost harvest and the second winter that dragged on into spring, popular feeling was rising. The thought pool of the city resounded with rumour and gutter sniping. When the people were hungry and cold, their humour deepened to mask the unrest. The latest laboured riddle ran, "When is the Pythia like a lost pipe cleaner?" As yet, Rassilon had failed to catch the punchline. Most rumours said that the Pythia was dead, and no successor had been named. But Rassilon still felt her thoughts like waves of hatred directed at him, and the campaign of contrived slurs against his name was endless. Amid his own public appearances and speeches, his journal reminded him that tomorrow he was due to see Pridonius again. This would be the 3rd visit that the hero had made to Rassilon's office above the west wing of the Academia Library. Pridonius was the last ally that Rassilon had expected, but the Admiralty was angry at the lack of funding for the Empire fleets. They were further incensed that the Time Project should be continuing after the loss of the Scaife the year before. A leader's greatness is best judged by the quality of her advisers. Shut up, Pelotov, you obsequious groveller, said Rassilon out loud. But the old philosopher had certainly known how to write a catchy sagery. An alerter purred, and a bubble retina glittered into the air above the desk. The face that appeared was all forehead, with a squat little visage crouching by the chin. Thrift, Rassilon's freeman servant, his invaluable tersurant factotum, won 11 years ago for a few treasons in a marketplace brawl game. Apologies, Mayor Papa, but listen, we've got a visitor in the library. Curator System thought you'd better take a look in. Thrift sneezed. The miserable frozen spring disagreed with his native equatorial constitution. The bubble flicked to a view of the main hall of the library, seen from a panoptic high in the galleries. The building was closed for the night, and the lights were dimmed. It took a moment for enhancers to elucidate the image, but Rassilon could see a hooded shape making its way across the central area. "Came straight through," said Thrift's voice over the scene. "All the doors just opened up by themselves, no argument." "Ask the curators to keep the main hall clear," Rassilon said. "I'm coming down now." "And Thrift?" "Yes, Mayor Papa?" "Run to the temple and fetch 2 sisters here. Don't use the vidilink. Go yourself." "Mayor Papa, it's snowing." "Take my coat. The southern fur trader's fur cloak. They will understand. But hurry, Thrift." In the main entrance to the library, Rassilon found the confused group of night curators. The massive doors had been thrown wide open before the intruders' advance and would not close. All secure systems had been overridden. The ghostly intruder, robed in blue, had passed into the main hall, ignoring their challenge. It had been wandering up and down the rows of ancient books so aimlessly that the panoptic security circuits were having problems following it. From the main hall, the presence had moved into an adjacent section of the library. It seemed to be seeking something. Rassilon thanked the curators for their information and deliberately removed his shoes. He slipped quietly down into the hall through a back route. By night, the library was like a cavern system, echoing and lost in shadow. High in the galleries above, snow was drifting silently against the tall windows. He moved quickly. The marble floor was bitterly cold on his bare feet. There were exhibits among the rows of shelves, ancient artifacts in dusty glass cases relating to the sections where they had been placed. Old bones and alien armour. In the half-light, they seemed to be watching, returned to secret life at night once all the paraphernalia of the day was gone. Rassilon heard her before he saw her. A voice raised in angry accusation, coming from several directions, bounced within the confines of the walls. He could not hear another voice. He rounded a corner in the section devoted to the barbaric empire of Thule and saw her. The Pythia's back was turned against him. She was facing one of the exhibit cases and leaning on her sceptre-headed wand. She had levelled a finger at the object in the glass case as she railed at it. "The door of the future is shut. I cannot see beyond. I drag myself from day to day and can see no further than the instant. I might as well walk backward. Speak to me, wise one." The severed head of the Sphinx stared at her from its case. Savage, feline eyes, frozen for more than a Gallifreyan year, since a sudden death had overthrown its regime of riddles. The Pythia laid down her wand and sat cross-legged on the floor before the head. Her tone was familiar, as if she recognised in the dead monster an old friend, an equal and ally. "They say that of all the augurers within the 9 corners of the universe, you see the furthest. Is it true? Yet you submitted to the sword of a Gallifreyan hero. Do you not see?" She paused and nodded to the head, as if she heard some answer. Rassilon, shifting back and forth on his frozen feet, heard nothing. The grotesque shape in the glass case was just an object. "Yes, that's true," the Pythia went on. "Perhaps you are far-sighted, and the future that's close is transparent to you, so that you can see beyond." She laughed, an old crone's cackle, not the voice of a demigoddess at all. "Perhaps we both need spectacles." A pearl of guilt that had rolled in Rassilon's mind for a year was growing. how much of the Pythia's state of mind was due to his own intervention, an act of egotistic mischief that another had warned him against. The dark tradition of millennia was instilled in his soul also. Was he the man to sever the ancient course of Gallifreyan history, as surely as the hero sliced the monster's head from its spine? "Time is changing," said the Pythia to the Sphinx. She rocked on her haunches like a wailing woman at a funeral. They would sweep away all the ageless lore with a cold and dismal practice that they call reason. The library echoed her shriek of disgust. "Fools! They have machine minds and do not fear the gods. They say the gods are dead and want to steal their thrones. I fear they will succeed. I, who am Gallifrey, must know. Tell me what you see." Rassilon stepped closer to the hunched figure. "Tell me, wise one," the Pythia cried. She pressed her hands against the glass of the exhibit. "If they doom me, they doom the world. What is the future? Tell me." Rassilon fell forward with a cry of pain. His toe had stubbed on a shelf. He stumbled over in agony. The Pythia turned, and a wave of hatred hit him like the hindward kick of a Sagittary to his head. "You!" she cried. As he reeled under the blow, he saw the venerable Pythia, a decrepit old woman, struggling up with her wand like a spider on spindly arms and legs. Her eyes fixed him, eclipsing any other pain. They burned into his mind like knives. His lungs seethed with scorching air. The jewels on her robe clinked and glittered like starlight. She was muttering a spell over and over as she scrambled closer. It sounded like "veil, veil, veil." Rows of books spilled to the floor as he clutched at anything in an attempt to steady himself. He fell to his knees. He could taste smoke and his body was scorching. Then the attack ceased. He tried to catch the air to cool his throat. He looked up, bewildered that he was not dead. The Pythia stood over him, tall, taller than him, even in her dotage. But then everyone was taller than him. Tears of anger ran down her wrinkled golden face. "Veil is lost, little man," she said. "I cannot find him." Out of her coiled hair she pulled a steel comb and lifted it to strike at him. He caught her bony arm and tried to push her away. Her strength was frightening. The comb wavered close above his head. There was a clatter of shoes on the marble floor. Another arm, squat with white hair, dragged the Pythia clear. She cried out and pulled free of Thrift's grip. Then she threw down the comb and crouched to the floor in a fetal knot. Thrift pulled Rassilon to his feet. "Meo Papa, you all right?" It was a statement, not a question. Tercerans know about things like that. Two sisters stood nervously behind, young adepts with snow still clinging to their rust-red cloaks. Rassilon hauled himself up and tried to stand on his good foot. He coughed and cleared his throat several times before he could manage to speak at all. The Pythia ignored them all. She squatted, staring at the lifeless head of the Sphinx. "Despite the rumours, your mistress is in shockingly good physical health," he croaked at the adepts. "I think you'd better take her home before she does someone an injury with her mind." The Pythia, her face shaking and eyes staring emptily, pushed away the helping hands and got to her feet. She walked slowly out, followed by one of the sisters. The other adept, her hair like a torrent of red fire, lingered for a moment, staring at the Sphinx head in the glass case. "It's just a facsimile," said Rassilon, "only exhibited in the library while the real head is being studied and cleaned." He watched the tall adept walk away between the rows of shelving, so cool-faced and so young and pledged to a lifetime of unworldly devotions. His toe began to throb, the overture to a whole concert of aches and pains throughout his body. "Veil," he muttered. The name was vaguely familiar, but he could not quite place it. From the thought pool of the people, he suddenly caught the punchline of the joke. When is the Pythia like an old pipe cleaner? When she's gone clean round the bend.